I can't tell you what it is with the Minister of Education. You would have had to experience it. It is an attempt to try and bring together all kinds of diverse stakeholders. Mr. Henry and President of the National Parent Teachers Association and Mr. Minot, and to get the system to work. And in transforming the system, I think that's the greatest challenge. How do you keep the system going while trying to change it? Because if not, the whole thing will just implode or probably explode. So it is a management task, but it is also a policy task. And it also has to do with just timely implementation. I'm going to try and look at my thoughts in about 3 or 4 different categories, and I want to start at my own concern of the underperformance of the system. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying that the entire system underperforms, but I think if you look at the whatever data we have, you can't help but be a little surprised that you have some good teachers, you have some good administrators, you have perhaps not as many good physical plants as you would like, but there are physical plants. And let me just say, what the school looks like has nothing to do with how the school performs. Taking up from where I think the point that Dr. Rapley made, I have seen some of the worst looking schools with the best performance. And so there is the issue of leadership that was raised by Mr. Henry, but I think there are far more ingredients than that. So the task force report warns us that we should not look for a silver bullet in trying to determine how to get the system to perform, that it really is as the synergies between a number of factors. The question really is, how do you identify those factors? And I think one of the things we can look at are schools that with very limited resources have performed very well. And there are many of them. I don't know how many of you saw an insert in the Gleaner. I think it's Gleaner. I mean, Mr. Clark would be sad if I thought it was something else. But I don't think we have taken the time to look at it. It's something that I myself am planning to do a study of. Some of the schools that we have written off, students with 10 subjects in CSEC, students with 9 subjects in CSEC. Is it a critical moment and a combination of critical factors that have allowed them to now be performing? And what are those factors? I think we need to know, because it is very interesting to see some of those schools that have done so well in CSEC for the first time. What is the critical energy or series of infusions of energy that have led to these schools now showing that they can perform? Now, in sort of looking at the question of what is the issue in terms of underperformance, I think we can settle more or less on the recognition that we as a country, or certainly the 2 major political parties, have come to some accommodation in terms of policy. Much of what the minister presented today is a carry-on of where we were, and that's not to say that you're not going to have changes. This is not the finally revealed biblical text on education, because so much is being learned as we go along. But the issue is there need to be some core values that we now embrace and some core goals and say this is how we're going to go forward. I think that that is a major milestone. And what I would say for CaPRI is to begin to engage the country in looking at what are these goals and values. Have an argument and a conversation about it. This is adumbrated in very great detail in this document. There are about 2 pages of what we call a shared vision. And the shared vision came out of me as Minister of Education and the team going around the island, meeting with principals, and I mean they were in there. It's not the finally revealed biblical text. As I say, there will always be changes, but let us embrace and let us articulate some core values that will be those of our education system. Where we have the challenge, I think, is translating this now into a series of programs that work. And it's not just the design of the programs. and the implementation, but the sustainability of the programs. I listened very carefully to the head of USAID. And one of the things I found in the ministry, and why I insisted to Mrs. Bowman that, listen, don't go and do anything else new, is that we have a alphabet soup of projects in the Ministry of Education. And they are very current and they are embraced once the funding is there. When it goes, the program dies. And we do not have the tradition of adapting and cascading what we have learned into the general system. And I would suggest to you that that is the only way we're going to get the sustainability, identifying those things that have worked. The literacy 1, 2, 3, I hear the plea of my education officer, or my former education officer, sorry. And I'm going to come back to that issue, right? Because in many instances, it's a hype, and then we go back to business as usual. How do we sustain what we have learned? And how do we get the commitment, not just from the Ministry of Education, but the Ministry of Finance? I had many quarrels with the Ministry of Finance because they wanted to tell us how to run literacy, and I had to remind them, no, you are to fund it, not to tell me how to do it. So there has to be that conversation as well about what are the resource priorities. We have tried several things in terms of accountability, which I think we need to put on the table. One of them is the question of, for instance, of contracting of principals. And here is where, you know, I just said to Mr. Henry, tell me what is the JTA going to give to the discussion about accountability, and he agreed that, you know, we need to have that conversation as well. But the contracting of principals, that was something that I think there was a view to go back to it, but it created one hue and cry about whether in fact you are trying to penalize these people. So the question of what kind of a contractual agreement do you have with your principals in terms of their performance is something that we have looked at before. The issue was raised here earlier about the responsibility of the principal as the instructional leader, and my understanding is that the instructional leader is not the person giving the instruction, but the person who ensures that the standards are met, the work plans are done, and that the instructions are carried out. So they're not actually in the classroom doing the leadership, but they are leading the process. Now, there is a concern, for example, about the amount of load that a principal carries. She may be the MD or he may be the MD, but a managing director usually has people to whom they delegate functions. Being a principal is a big job. Schools have 2,000, 3,000 children. Now, if you were running that business, you know, you would have some people who could maintain the plant. The principal is the plant maintenance manager. The principal is the person in charge of the sick bay. The principal is the person in charge of procurement. The principal gets no time to find out what is happening in the school. Many of them can't even come out of their office. So one of the and I'm here just citing some of the things that were tried in terms of accountability, and not exhaustively, was to look at the whole question of clustering schools, where you had schools in a particular vicinity, you clustered them, and instead of everybody having their own bursar and financial manager and whatever, you had a cluster manager for a series of schools. Again, people felt you were taking away the schools from them, especially the churches. We had a big argument with some of the churches. You're trying to take away the school from under our control. My point is that we have to be open for innovation. And the schools that have done the innovation are the schools that are performing regardless. And many of the items of innovation are things that we can readapt or we can look at again. But sometimes the incremental approach is not going to get us where we want to go. We may have to make some bold decisions, and the question is, how do we get people on board? Not seeming to be insensitive, not seeming to have any disregard, but to also look at the benefits of doing some of these new things.